family was poor and their futures looked bleak. Even though he wanted to help them, his family still laughed at him and said he would have a better chance flying to the moon. In the end, he wanted to prove them wrong. He'd show them what someone with a purpose could achieve. And he wanted to do this all through a young boy he decided to call Naruto. So how did this boy from a poor Japanese town become one of the most successful people in the country? Write a story which stands on top of the entire world. Let's just say it wasn't easy, and more than once, this journey completely broke him. In many ways, his life is as sad, dramatic, and intense as Naruto's was, and the world he grew up in was as bloodthirsty as the ninja world itself. To make things worse, he had a twin brother who sabotaged him, family who didn't believe in him, and the worst luck ever. This is the story of Masashi Kishimoto, his untold tale. It's filled with defeats, victories, and even more defeats. Only by a sheer miracle did he succeed. But let me take you back to where it all began, in a small town near Hiroshima. Masashi Kishimoto was born in 1974 in the small town of Nagi in Japan's Okayama Prefecture. Okayama in the 70s was a lush and tranquil place. It was even known as the land of sunshine because of how green the landscape was and how happy its people were. But it had a darker side too. So many of its residents carried horrifying mental and even physical scars left over from the Second World War. Just west of this seemingly happy place lies Hiroshima, the place where the first ever atomic bomb was detonated. As these two prefectures share a border, many refugees fleeing the deadly radiation found safety in Kishimoto's birth town. Masashi's grandfather was one of them. As you can see, his family had scars that ran deep. When he was a young boy, Masashi's grandfather would tell him and his identical twin brother, Seishi, stories about the war, and especially the destruction that followed. Although they were safe, tucked away in the snow-covered valleys of his hometown, Masashi was fascinated by the tales. One time, he asked his grandfather what caused the First and Second World Wars. The answer he was given would stay with him forever. After thinking about the best way to explain such a complex thing to a child, his grandfather told him that they were always related to grudges. Revenge and resentment were the cause. Although he was only a child when his grandfather said it, much later, it would help him create one of the greatest stories ever written. But he had many challenges to overcome. Because little did young Masashi know, his greatest challenge would be one of the people he loved the most. But at least he got to experience some happiness as a child. You see, during Masashi's childhood, there was one man who was the king of the manga world, a man named Akira Toriyama. While he's known for his legendary series Dragon Ball, when Masashi was a child, Toriyama's hit manga at the time was actually, instead, a manga called Dr. Slump. Masashi loved Dr. Slump and spent multiple hours every day drawing his version of its iconic characters. He was particularly fond of how it gave animals human characteristics and personalities, something that we'd later see in his future work. But while Masashi's favorite manga was Dr. Slump, his identical twin brother Seishi leaned more towards a manga called Doraemon, and both would spend countless hours arguing about which was better. A few times, this would even lead to fists flying between the two. It seemed the brothers were prepared to go to war. The tension in the household was reaching a breaking point, especially to their grandfather, who felt as if the horrific war he had experienced in his youth had now reincarnated inside his home. This was the start of a heated rivalry, not just in their opinions, but now in their art. And thus, Masashi and Seishi started to compete with one another in their manga drawings. They both wanted to be the best. The two of them were constantly trying to see who was the better manga artist, and as they got older, their love for manga only grew stronger, and their rivalry only more intense. However, as they neared the end of elementary school, they discovered something they loved even more than manga: anime. In the year 1986, the two Kishimoto brothers were 12 years old, and the Dragon Ball anime had just come out. It was revolutionary. Nothing like it had ever been seen before, and it was absolutely everywhere. The manga was already popular, but now it was on television, and it became a national phenomenon. If you were a kid in Japan during the mid-80s to the late 90s, you couldn't have missed it if you tried. Even though Masashi was already a huge fan of Akira Toriyama, as he entered his teenage years, he became obsessed. During his middle school years, he also became a fan of video games, especially one video game in particular called Dragon Quest. What made it even more special to Masashi, though, was the fact that his hero, Akira Toriyama, designed the characters of this game. So to say he was a fan of Toriyama would be an understatement. He saw himself as more of a disciple, but his devotion alone wasn't enough. His family was in poverty. While Masashi did his best to keep up with the weekly releases of the Dragon Ball manga with what little money his family gave him, when he got to his mid-teens, he had no money at all. This hurt Masashi the most, as the Shonen Jump magazine was going through its golden age in the late 80s, selling around 3 million copies a week. And if you were a Dragon Ball fan, this was the only place you could get your fix. Although a copy of Shonen Jump cost less than $1 in those days, Masashi still didn't have enough. Every week, he did his best to scrape enough money together for a copy, but most of the time, he couldn't. Being one of the only kids who couldn't afford to read Dragon Ball was tough. And for him, it was twofold. After all, he wasn't just a fan. He had the dream of becoming a world-renowned manga artist as well. But above all else, he had to beat his brother, and he had found a strange way to do it. As Masashi neared the end of middle school, he'd found a silver lining to his dilemma. Although he couldn't afford to subscribe to Shonen Jump himself, one of his close friends could. This friend let him read the magazine once he was done with it. Although this wasn't ideal, it still meant he could get the Dragon Ball fix he needed so desperately. However, there was another problem right around the corner. A problem that a young, aspiring manga artist could never foresee. Puberty. Teenagers change their minds like tree leaves change colors. And as Masashi entered high school, his life began an entirely new season. One that didn't involve manga. He was now 15, and he was starting to outgrow his love for manga and anime. He made new friends and started to take up new hobbies. One of them was sports. His spare time, which was once all about manga, was now filled with basketball and baseball. Before, he'd spend his lunch breaks in the school library with his head in the manga. Now, he spent it on courts battling his peers in intense sports matches. Although on the surface, these two pastimes look like complete opposites, they are more similar than you may think. One of the things Masashi and almost everybody else loves about Dragon Ball, and manga in general, is the idea of the hero's journey. The idea of leveling up your skills and overcoming challenges, something that is also a big part of sports. Both baseball and basketball are popular in Japan, and Masashi was likely drawn to them because to succeed, you needed determination. And he did have determination. The determination that he felt was tied to his destiny. The determination to finally beat the villain of his story. The villain who he was born alongside with. A small part in Masashi's mind gave him fantasies of becoming a world-class sportsman. Would he stay in Japan? Or maybe he would go to America? No, perhaps he should play for his hometown instead. As all of these thoughts raced through his head every day, he knew what the answer was to all of them. The answer that none of these really mattered. Because at the end of the day, he would be the superior Kishimoto brother. For a while, he'd all but forgotten about being a world-class manga artist. However, somewhere deep inside, his childhood dream lived on. And although the flame of his aspirations had dimmed, it hadn't completely gone out. And thus, one day, it would be rekindled. But the trigger to what did it was as intense as can be. But before we get into what it was that sparked his passion for manga again, we should probably delve a bit more into the impact sports had on him. Because actually, it did stay with him even to this day. So, probably one of the biggest examples of the impact sports, specifically basketball, had on Masashi's life was when he sent young NBA star Zion Williamson a hand-drawn portrait. It wasn't just any portrait, it was special. It showed him dressed as a shinobi. That was also around the same time that Jordan launched a Naruto collaboration, which again was a huge example of the influence Naruto had on the world. Furthermore, Zion Williamson even tweeted his heartfelt thanks to Masashi and explained the positive influence Naruto had on his life. In a tweet, he said, "Honored to share a one-of-a-kind drawing by Masashi Kishimoto, the creator of Naruto. My interest in anime began at a young age and still inspires me today. Naruto's motto was to always believe in yourself and everything will work out." So Masashi was an avid basketball fan and still is. And for a while, that overtook his love for drawing. But as he approached his 16th birthday, something would change everything. When young Masashi was walking home from school one day. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the video so far, then be sure to like, subscribe, and especially make sure to hit that notification bell if you want to see more videos. Also, be sure to follow my Twitter. Anyway, back to the story. Up until this point, Dragon Ball was Masashi's main source of inspiration and the basis of his art style. But that was about to change. As he approached the end of his high school days, Masashi pondered whether or not he was done with drawing. Between sports and studying, there just wasn't much time to practice. However, one day, on his way home from school, he stumbled upon a poster. It wasn't just any poster. It was a poster of Akira. No, not Akira Toriyama, but the legendary animated film called Akira. When Masashi saw the poster, he was stunned. To him, it was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. The art style, the colors, the angles. One by one, they all captivated him. And then they all hit him at once. He was blown away. This is the poster he saw. And all of a sudden, he knew what he needed to do. This caused his old dream of being a world-class manga artist to return in a flash. He just couldn't stop looking at it. Masashi would stare at it for hours in the following weeks. Strangely, his idol and the film that would restart his dreams shared the same name. It's like it was destiny. Later on in his life, Masashi described the experience and said, "I don't know why, but seeing this poster had an intense emotional effect on me. For some reason, I spent about an hour just staring at it." The poster has the main character Kaneda walking towards his bike. The angle was from above. It was a very difficult composition. How can this person draw such a difficult composition? I've never seen a person who could do that. The experience lit a fire within the young Masashi. And since then, he's been striving to create a piece that's special. But Akira itself was certainly special. It wasn't just Masashi that it impacted, it was the whole of Japan, and later, the world. So in his last year of high school, his flame was rekindled and his dream was revived. Like a phoenix, he was back. He knew in his heart he had what it took to be one of the best to ever do it, and hence, he resumed his journey. But this journey would hit a brick wall just as soon as it started. If this was a manga, it would be at this point that the tale really starts. If this was Naruto, this would be when he meets his teacher Iruka and his quest to become a ninja truly begins. It's one thing having a dream, we all did at one point, but achieving it is something else entirely. Especially when your dream is to become the best in the world at something. Although his mind was now set and he knew exactly what he wanted to do, the road to becoming a well-respected manga artist wasn't straightforward. Plus, while he took a break from drawing while he focused on sports, his brother hadn't. Now he had some serious catching up to do. Riding the wave of inspiration that Akira had given him, he spent countless hours drawing. He copied storyboards from Dragon Ball and Akira, and even came up with his own stories. Any spare time he had was now spent pursuing his dream. You could say he was obsessed, or in some ways, possessed. Still, it's all well and good to pursue your dreams, and of course, practice makes perfect. But he was a high school student and still needed to graduate. Since he'd put his studies on the back seat to create manga, his grades had seriously started to suffer. And thus, as the end of his high school era approached, he had a decision to make. Carry on drawing manga or focus on his studies. Of course, he could have taken a break from drawing and resumed later, but he'd already taken too much time off. Therefore, he chose manga. He dove in head first and put all of his eggs in that basket. He sacrificed success in school to pursue his dream. And by the end of the 11th grade, he was ranked 30th out of 31 students in his class. That's to say, he did terrible. But on the bright side, his work was starting to see fruit, and he had just finished his first manga. To complete said manga, he had spent hours and hours refining his style. He even tried to combine elements from Dragon Ball as well as a new style that was influenced by Akira. But it was to no avail. As he sat there with his finished work in his hands, he knew he had failed. It just wasn't good. But he thought maybe he was just being too critical, so he decided to see what his family thought. Sadly for Masashi, none of his family liked it either. Well, apart from one, none other than his twin brother. What did his twin brother like about his manga so much? Was it the art, the story, the characters? It was none of these. His brother liked it so much because it was so bad. Because this meant Masashi would never be able to beat him. Masashi cursed himself. He wished he'd never wasted so much time playing sports. Now, what would he do? His future was starting to look very bleak. But his will to draw wasn't completely put out. First though, he had his education to worry about. Most of his friends as well as his twin brother were going to college, but with his grades, that was very unlikely. They all had a leg up in their life with their education, but Masashi sacrificed that for no benefit. However, in the depths of his despair, he found a glimmer of hope. He took a leap of faith and applied for college at an art school. In his head, he would constantly play the mantra, "Things will work out," again and again. His future looked dim, but he held on to his dream and hoped and prayed that things would work out. And they did. He was accepted into college, and a new chapter would begin. But the things that would happen in college would be much worse than just a few family members laughing at him. Despite failing high school, by sheer luck he was able to secure a place at an art college, which was just what he needed to pursue his career. Although both he and his peers hated his first ever real attempt at manga, he never gave up. The harsh reception of his first manga caused him to go back to the drawing board. He realized that inspiration alone wouldn't be enough, and he had to develop a new, unique style. Because manga was becoming bigger and bigger, he needed to find a way to stand out, to separate himself from the crowd. Hence, his first years of college were spent refining his skills. During the day, he'd attend his class and learn everything he could about art. In the night, he'd read, research, and write. On the surface, he was your below-average college student, but inside, he was bursting with ideas. Everywhere he went, he saw manga posters, anime ads, and people reading the newest hits. He knew one day they'd be reading his work. Soon after, a realization hit him that to stand out, he'd have to broaden his horizons, and thus he temporarily drifted away from Dragon Ball and Akira and started to look at newer stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Ninku, two popular manga at the time. Later, by sheer chance, he'd meet the main artist behind the Ninku anime. Another coincidence? Or was it destiny? But we'll get to that soon. Eventually, after much deep thought, it hit him. He knew exactly how he was going to break into the manga scene. While the shonen genre was getting very popular and was also his favorite style of manga, he saw that its themes and subgenres were quite limited. Cyberpunk and sci-fi manga like Ghost in the Shell and Akira were super popular, and traditional martial arts stuff like Dragon Ball was doing well. But those genres were oversaturated, and his idea to break into the shonen scene was much closer to home. When most people think of Japan and its history, samurai and ninja are bound to come to mind. So he thought, why not create something like that? Miraculously, hardly anybody had thought of it yet. He saw a gap in the manga market and aimed to capitalize on it. And so he got to work on a samurai-themed manga. That style was known as Chanbara, and he wanted to be the first to feature one in Weekly Shonen Jump. However, shortly after he started it, he stumbled upon another samurai-themed manga known as Rurouni Kenshin. Therefore, he was struck by the brutal realization that he was no longer first. But there was still a glimmer of hope, a chance he could still be the earliest in Shonen Jump. Sadly, that hope was soon crushed, as one day when Masashi decided to pick up a copy of Weekly Shonen Jump, he was heartbroken to see Rurouni Kenshin featured inside. So once more, back to the drawing board he went. Frustrated but firm in his resolve, Masashi scrapped his previous work and started fresh. And finally, after failure and failure, Masashi had finally found some success. He was now about halfway through art school, and so far things weren't working out. Because of his previous rejections and his inability to create something unique, he was in a slump. His dream was still alive, but the path to it was cloudy. The question, what hasn't been done before, kept circling around and around in his mind. At this point, his style closely resembled that of Akira with its dark themes and kinetic drawings. And although he wanted to create a shonen, he drifted more and more away from it. Shonen-style manga is characterized by its straightforward, action-packed stories that are marketed toward teenage boys. However, its cousin style is called seinen, which is known to be much more graphic and complex. Seinens aim towards young men. To put it simply, Dragon Ball was shonen, but Akira was seinen. So somewhere along the way, Masashi's style had drifted away from shonen and more towards seinen. But that was a blessing in disguise, as his college had a contest coming up for aspiring manga artists, and he aimed to impress. As the contest drew closer and closer, he had a few ideas of what his new story would be about. And so his mind drifted back toward his childhood days. He remembered being in his cozy home with his grandpa and all of the stories he'd tell. Because of the atomic bomb and Japan's involvement, stories about the First and Second World Wars stuck out more than the others, and slowly an idea started to form. Using themes from the two world wars, such as evil scientists, weapons of mass destruction, and all-around chaos, he came up with a manga he called Karakuri. The day of the competition finally came. Masashi handed in his draft. After hours and hours waiting for the verdict, he finally got his response. It was a hit. He impressed the judges and won the contest, just like if he himself was a protagonist in a manga story, but there was no happy ending just yet. He still had a career to pursue and a dream to accomplish. Now, with a taste of success in his mouth, he started to think about the next steps of his journey. After all, he was a man now, and his university days were coming to an end. The next logical step was to take his story and try and get it featured in a magazine. But which one? The obvious answer was Shonen Jump, but his manga had drifted too far away from the genre and was too graphic for teenagers. Ever since he was a kid, he wanted to create the next big shonen, but somewhere on this path, he lost his way. That meant his next course of action was to change his style again, and this time bring it back to its roots. With momentum on his side, he got to work and made plans of how he'd feature in weekly Shonen Jump. By sheer luck, or something else, he decided to watch an anime known as Hashire Melos, which was an anime adaptation of a novel that Masashi read as a kid. He was inspired by how well it portrayed the characters, and the art style reminded him of his shonen roots. That sparked his curiosity, and he started researching more and more works, but this time from anime rather than manga. His time at art school was drawing to a close, but around the campus, his name started to become well known. Word about his success in the art contest was starting to spread. He was becoming popular. Then one day, out of the blue, he had an encounter that would elevate him to entirely new heights. Since his manga was becoming known around his college, one of his peers said he'd introduce him to his family friend, who was apparently somebody well known in the anime and manga scene. Of course, Masashi agreed, but when he met the guy, he couldn't believe it. It was Tetsuya Nishio, the man behind the Ninku anime, the same Ninku that Masashi took inspiration from not too many years ago. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Masashi was able to pick Nishio's brain and learn from somebody who was directly involved in the industry. He'd been a fan of the Ninku manga for a while and had just started to look towards anime adaptations for inspiration. It was perfect, and it wouldn't be the last time he saw Nishio. In fact, much later, the two would join forces on one of the biggest projects in anime history. So now, Masashi had finished art school. Using all of the influences and inspiration he had at his disposal, he refined his style. He believed he'd created something new. It was finally time. He was about to take on Shonen Jump. But would he have a shot? He soon found out very quickly. The year was 1995, and he was about to approach Shonen Jump. His success in college art competitions gave him the confidence he needed. That, combined with his meeting with the anime artist Nishio, inspired him. He now knew how to readapt his style and make it more shonen-friendly. Since his story with Karakuri had already shown signs of success, it made sense to stick to that, and thus he tweaked, changed, and readapted it to be more suitable for a shonen audience. And the only thing left to do was send it to Shonen Jump. After it was sent, he anxiously awaited their response. He waited and waited. Had they seen it? Did they reject it? What's taking so long? All that was on his mind. Then, one day, in 1996, they responded. To his delight, they liked it. In fact, it won him an honorable mention in that year's Hop Step Award, which was granted to promising rookies. And that's what he was, a rookie with a lot of potential. And he just made his first big break. So shortly after he won the award, Shonen Jump contacted him directly and assigned him an editor, and in a lot of ways, he was Masashi's mentor. The two of them got to work on creating something special, something that could feature in Shonen Jump's weekly magazine. Their first project was called Michikusa, a slice of life manga, and its name meant wandering detour. It was rejected. Not losing hope, the two tried again. This time, Masashi came up with a manga called Asian Punk, but that too was soon rejected. But in 1997, he came up with an idea. What to call this idea, though? Masashi didn't know. Many names came and went, but none were perfect. Just as he was about to pick something random, he decided to go to a restaurant to relax himself first. As he entered, a waiter passed by with a bowl ready to give to a nearby customer. Masashi's eyes darted to the bowl. He looked inside, and then he knew. Naruto. Now, of course, it wasn't just Naruto Maki that inspired this name. The famous Naruto whirlpools did also play a part. This Naruto, though, was just an early draft. In this debut version of the story, Naruto is a literal fox who lives with a human appearance and had a father that attacked the village. Although quite different, it does share a few similarities to the later series. For one, Naruto looks almost exactly the same and is portrayed as a mischievous kid. There are also some early forms of jutsu in it, and Naruto's signature move is called Demon Fox no Jutsu, which allows him to transform into his original fox form. And of course, he also loves ramen. However, that's about it when it comes to similarities. In the first edition, there's no ninjas, and some of the characters even use guns. Still, Shonen Jump loved it and decided to publish it as a one-time entry in their summer magazine called Akamaru Jump. Although that was only a one-shot manga, it convinced the magazine to give him a chance to produce a weekly series for the official weekly Shonen Jump. If he just could impress them, then that was it. His dream of being a well-renowned manga artist would be complete. So he got to work on revising Karakuri, as he believed that would be his best shot at stardom. But before it was done, Shonen Jump asked him to create another one-shot manga for the magazine, so he started to work on that instead. That was in December of 1997. And just after the new one-shot was finished, his editor contacted him and said that Shonen Jump needed to publish Karakuri in 2 weeks. That was nowhere near enough time to complete it. It meant he had to rush it. He knew it wasn't ready, but he couldn't exactly tell them to wait. So it was published at the beginning of 1998, and it was a flop. But there's something he said recently, that's to say, summer 2024, that shines a light on this part of the story. This summer, Masashi Kishimoto was in France for the very first time. It was just after the Olympics, and he visited with his assistant, Mikio Ikimoto, who you might know as the artist for the Boruto manga. They arrived at the Grand Rex movie theater and sat down to answer some questions from fans. One fan asked Masashi what's the best piece of advice he'd ever been given. This was his reply: "I'm more of the type to not have confidence in myself. It's not that I'm not motivated, but I lack confidence." There, Mr. Yahagi, my first editor, wrote me a letter to tell me, "You have talent." I believed in his words. They had an impact on me. Hence, in 1998, those words served as a lifeline. Being rejected by your friends, family, and even your employer would hurt, but seeing countless negative fan surveys about Karakuri cut Masashi even deeper. After all, that was his masterpiece, the manga he was sure would be a success. Seeing that fail was soul-destroying. And so, after all his hard work, revisions, and adaptations to suit the shonen genre, he gave up. He waved goodbye to his goal of creating a successful shonen and parted ways with the magazine. Instead, he started drawing seinen again and hoped to try his luck in a magazine of that style. Because of his old passion for baseball, he started working on a manga about that, as well as a seinen-style manga about the mafia. But although he'd given up on himself, his editor hadn't. After much persuasion, his editor, Yahagi, convinced Masashi to give shonen one last chance, and together they set out to create a one-time fantasy manga called Magic Mushroom. However, one day Yahagi called him and announced that they were going to scrap that idea, and instead, they came up with a plan to turn Naruto into a weekly series. They scrapped the old version and decided to start from scratch. A new leaf, so to speak. Because Naruto as a character was well received, they kept him, but decided to rework the story and redesign the world. He took elements from Karakuri, like this ability that closely resembles what would later be known as Chidori. He also decided to make the world a darker place and bring in elements of sorrow and themes of war. With a revamped world and the first 3 chapters designed, they approached Shonen Jump. Finally, the magazine was impressed. They decided to give Masashi a weekly spot. What's more is that they also gave him a whole 6 months to get it ready. It was more than enough time. He had finally done it. The legendary weekly Shonen Jump magazine. But Masashi was happy about this for another reason. The first thought that came into his mind was that he had finally won against his twin brother. Or had he? What was Masashi's brother Seishi doing this whole time? Well, if you thought Masashi was struggling to find success in the manga world, Seishi was doing even worse. Whereas Masashi was willing to adapt his style and incorporate elements from things other than shonen, Seishi wasn't as open-minded, and it cost him. None of his early works were published. They were too similar to Dragon Ball and brought nothing new to the table. In fact, it was only after his brother's big break that anyone even knew his name. Years after Naruto became popular, Seishi finally managed to get his manga published. Wanna guess what it's about? Well, let's just say the main character is a lively young boy with spiky hair who's harboring the spirit of an evil demon inside of him. Sound familiar? Anyway, they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery, so it's safe to say Masashi was the victor. His oldest rival had been defeated, but there was no time to celebrate because a brand new rivalry was brewing. A new enemy he had to defeat. In September of 1999, the Naruto manga was published. It was a hit. Fans loved it, and it quickly became one of Japan's favorite manga. It even won Masashi the coveted Rookie of the Year award. Long years of struggle and striving had finally paid off, and his dream had come true. He was a well-respected manga author, and it wasn't long before people would be comparing him to his idol, Akira Toriyama. As it sold more and more copies, it started to make waves across the sea, too. It started to draw attention from the US audience, and in no time, plans were in place to adapt it for an anime. Although Masashi Masashi was a fan of anime, he wouldn't be the one overseeing it, since he had the manga to focus on. Instead, he insisted that the well-respected anime artist Nishio, who he had met all the way back while he was still experiencing his early manga failures, should oversee the character designs in the anime. So the man whose work had once inspired him was now in charge of bringing the anime version to life. It was poetic. In 2002, the anime made its debut, and that was also a hit, and thus it quickly turned Naruto into a global phenomenon. But although Masashi had certainly surpassed his first rival, soon he'd have another one. 2 years prior to Naruto, in 1997, Eiichiro Oda's One Piece was published in Shonen Jump, and that too was a huge hit. It had a head start on Naruto, and now Masashi considered Eiichiro as his new rival. When speaking about his rivalry with Oda, in an interview, Masashi said, "One Piece debuted about a year earlier than Naruto did. Even though we're the same age, he beat me to it. I was very envious in the beginning, and yet, at the same time, I wanted to not only be like him, but I wanted to surpass him." And thus, Naruto, One Piece, and Dragon Ball became some of the 3 most popular manga and anime series in Japan, and fans debated and argued about which was the best, just like Masashi and his brother had done when they were younger. Dragon Ball was like the father, and Naruto and One Piece its sons. While One Piece beat Naruto in sales in Japan, Naruto was more popular worldwide. In fact, there's an argument to be made that Naruto is the most popular anime in history. I mean, after all, Google themselves confirmed that the most searched anime of all time was Naruto. By the time the Naruto manga ended in 2014, it had run for 15 years and sold over 300 million copies. When speaking about the ending of Naruto and his rivalry with Oda, Masashi had this to say: "I would say my rival is One Piece's creator, Eiichiro Oda. Honestly, it's interesting because I was just saying that on my own in the beginning. And then finally, in the back of Naruto Volume 72, Oda-sensei acknowledged the fact that he considers me his rival as well. That felt so gratifying. This rivalry was one of the many parallels between Naruto and Kishimoto's own life. In some ways, he was Naruto and Oda was Sasuke. And just like those two, they ended up as friends. And thus, Naruto came to an end. But Masashi Kishimoto's career as a manga artist wasn't over yet, and he had some scores to settle. It was now 2014. Naruto had just ended. Despite pressure from his higher-ups to carry it on, Masashi said no. Enough was enough. He had a vision for how it would end, and he was determined to stick with it. But soon after, though, he announced that the wider series would continue in the form of Boruto, a sequel about Naruto's son. Hence, between the years of 2014 and 2015, he began working on a miniseries called Naruto, the 7th Hokage and the Scarlet Spring, a miniseries that would run until Boruto's release in 2015. He oversaw the release of Boruto, but took a hands-off approach, leaving most of it in the hands of Ukyo Kadachi with the writing and his apprentice Mikio Ikimoto with the drawings. However, he wasn't done with manga just yet. Out of nowhere, he announced to the world that he was creating something brand new. It was going to be unique, never seen before, world-shattering. Years before, he had wanted to create a samurai-inspired manga, and now he had the chance. He announced that his new work was going to be sci-fi inspired, and it would be even better than Naruto. Fans waited in anticipation, but for years they heard nothing. Masashi had decided to spend some quality time with his family first. Although he still partially worked on Boruto, he was taking a break. After all his hard work, in 2015, he was finally able to take a honeymoon with his wife. Hold on a second, his wife? When did he get married? Well, actually, the answer is quite shocking because Masashi's wedding was all the way back in 2003. Yes, that's right. He had his honeymoon 12 years after he got married. Masashi really did put his all into his dream of becoming a world-class manga author, and this is one proof of it. Between 2017 and 2018, there were whispers about his new sci-fi themed manga, but nobody had any more information. But in late 2018, he finally announced it. It was going to be called Samurai 8, The Tale of Hachimaru. He knew he had failed to create a successful samurai-themed manga years ago, and now was his chance to do so again. He also loved the sci-fi genre ever since he was inspired by Akira. So here was an opportunity to incorporate that. However, it flopped. It failed to gain an audience and was canceled a year later. Some things were just not meant to be. It seemed that Masashi got a taste from the bitter cup of failure that he not only knew so well back in his younger days, but the same cup that his twin brother had been tasting from the whole time with his own manga ventures. So in 2020, he decided to go back to Boruto. Though one sad final event would come his way, the recent tragic passing of his sensei and idol, Akira Toriyama. Dragon Ball really was the inspiration for not only Naruto, but many other of the most popular manga. Masashi was deeply affected by it and said, "Honestly, I don't know what to write or how to write about something so sudden. However, for now, I would like to express my thoughts and feelings to Toriyama-sensei, something I wish he would have asked me someday." Although his mentor is no longer around, Masashi Kishimoto now holds that title in the eyes of the next generation of manga authors. Many of them see him as their sensei, and we're sure Akira Toriyama would also be proud of him. Thanks for watching, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on that notification bell, and follow my Twitter if you want more.